I'm pretty sharp on this stuff, but basically what you're saying is,
Well, what I'm saying...
if I own it and I leave the state and somebody else is managing it for me, wouldn't they still be using my sales tax license and everything under my name?
Yeah, but the scenario I painted was you left and they got their own sales tax licenses. If you're the owner, why would they have sales tax licenses?
I agree. Why?
They would.
That's my point.
Then they would be a new owner and I would just be in South Carolina.
Yeah, exactly, and that's his point.
And if they're guaranteeing your insurance.
Right.
See, they assume the liability. Believe me, in the regulatory world, we see a wide variety of just these kinds of things. And the scenario I told you about, the manager, I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've seen that. And people were confident, oh no, I still own the business. Even though my manager just put $100,000 into the business, he's doing all the ordering for the inventory, he's got the lease in his name or I sublet it to him, I'm still the owner of the business. They argue with me. I mean, it's
now does this person who's arguing with you, do they get paid? That to me would be the onus. If they're still getting money from that manager, then they're probably still own something.
They carried a note back when the business was sold. Other than that, they're not getting a penny. They're not.
Okay, no, but that to me, like my standards would be different than yours. It would be who got paid. You know?
Yeah, and that's why I say you can't just. I want to be very careful about this. You can't just take one specific element of this and say that that makes them an owner. This is really a guidance tool, and it's telling you the kinds of things that we consider broad-based to determine who's an owner.
So let's say hypothetically I chose to make a foolish decision and get married and then I die. Would my spouse now be the owner of my business?
Depends what your will says.
Hypothetically, that would be what it said.
It has to go through probate and courts and all those kind of things.
Cool.
As a matter of drafting, I mean, this is a complicated area, and it would seem like what we're trying to do is define what is an owner, and sometimes as a drafting matter, it's easier to define who is not an owner, and I think that would bring some clarity to a lot of us here if we define explicitly that if you're an investor, you're not an owner of this business, you're merely an investor. If you're a lender, you just lend money to the business. Yeah, you bear some risk, but you're not an owner of the business. You're not controlling the business. You just lend money. Wells Fargo can lend money to these centers. If you're an employee, I think if we explicitly spell that out, that an employee is not an owner, even though an employee may say, you know, yeah, I think I could probably grow a few pounds for you. That's an employee under the direction of the owner of the business. That is not an owner of himself or herself. And also, I think we need to spell out explicitly that an independent contractor, you know, is not an owner, even though that person may exercise some involvement with the entity. I mean, I feel like I'm an independent contractor to these centers. I'm their attorney. I walk into the center. I look around. I say, you know, put a lock on this, put a thing up here. I mean, they take my advice or they don't, but, you know, I'm definitely not an owner of these. Never have been, and like you, probably never will be. But, you know, I think if we spell that out, you know, explicitly in here, and then we get them coming and going. We say this is what an owner is, but then if we also spell it out, this is not what an owner is.
And I'll play devil's advocate with you, Rob, on that one, because I would argue that there are situations where lenders, employees, and individual contractors are owners. And if I go that route, I'm going to miss one of those situations. And if I go that route and I miss one of those situations, I'm stuck with it. It's more generic for me to just lay the foundation and give a framework of the things that we consider generically. I mean, I still have to prove my case if we get to that point, and a hearing officer is going to have to hear it or whatever the case may be and make a decision. But that's the peril with going the other way. And so,
but then why can't we define in here, for example, what lender is an owner and what lender is not an owner? I mean, I think if you have a loan from a legitimate bank and a set payment schedule, you know, that bank does bear a risk. I mean, if you can default in that loan and the business can go away and the bank loses that. So there is a risk. So that bank could be, at least under A, defined as an owner, but I think everyone here would agree that bank really isn't an owner because that bank is not controlling the interior operations of the entity.
try and find another example, because banks are exempt pursuant to the statute from ownership.
And we should, well, I think maybe an angel investor. A lot of these, most of these centers do not get loans from banks. Let's be real, they can't even open bank accounts, for God's sake. So the bank is probably not going to be loaning them money. What they do get are loans from family members, friends, just like any startup business. You know, you start with your own personal network of friends and family, and they're called angel investors in the startup world. And I don't think those people are owners. I think they're investors. They're putting their money out there. They're getting paid back on a set schedule. And so I think we should specify that. I think that the goal of these regulations is to bring people as much specificity as possible and to answer that, well, I still have to prove my case. I mean, I hope our goal is to avoid that and give people, you know, black and white, bright line rules that they can follow. And there are always going to be some, you know, disagreements, but to the extent we can give, and investors that's a huge important area of this too. I mean, you can't start a business without some startup capital these days. I mean, in the old days, you probably could start on a shoestring and a prayer, but nowadays with the $7,500 fee, at minimum, to walk through the front door of this, you're going to have some investors, and you know, and you're going to have employees, because these are now larger entities that they're the vertical integration thing and all that, and you're going to have independent contractors. You always have. Independent contractors are not owners by any means, but they are involved with the business. So I could take a crack at it if you want. I think we could define, you know, who is an owner, but I think it helps to define who isn't an owner and be explicit about it.
Well, I mean, if you want to try and write something, go ahead. I just, under this scheme, I mean, I don't see
I'm not
where
getting a
lenders.
good vibe here. I'm not thinking
Well,
that's a good use.
again, I'm not sold on your approach, and so we can agree to disagree, but I am willing to look at what you write. I mean, there may be elements of that I can add that, you know, may compromise or find, you know, happy ground there, but specifically, lenders are exempt under the statute, and I don't see anything here that makes a lender an owner, I mean, at this point. And again, I don't want to focus just on one piece of it, because it is the totality of this. It's all of these things that have to be considered to make a decision about ownership. And Bob, you've been through this. I mean,
Yeah, I think what's missing is every one of these analyses is fact-driven. And like Matt said, you have to take the totality of all the circumstances, the factual circumstances, and overlay it onto the statute and the rule to see if somebody really is an owner, because people can call themselves whatever they want. I'm just an owner, I'm just a lender, I'm just this, I'm just an independent contractor. But these self-descriptions are usually make-believe. It's a question of fact, just like in any due process hearing. What is the real relationship between the parties? Who is calling the shots? Who's in control? Who's there on a day-to-day basis? Who's getting the profits? Who is firing or hiring employees? It's all of these things put together that make the ultimate determination a lot clearer, because no matter how many rules you draft, you're not going to make it any more clear for the licensee. If their intent is to evade the law by calling themselves something that they are not, then forget about these definitions. They don't mean anything.
And yeah, but when I hear totality, and courts say this all the time, it just creates way too much discretion, and it allows people to just, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I think the purpose of this is to spell it out so there isn't this huge regulatory discretion, and they can't just decide what they feel like. That there are objective standards, and that's the purpose of regulation, to work out the details. I mean, the legislation is already quite detailed, and this is even further detail for people. And the area of who's an owner and who isn't an owner, as you well know, is an extremely touchy inquiry. You know, there are people who just can't be owners, but maybe they still want to give a loan to somebody who can be, and there's nothing wrong with that.
there might be.
Well, I don't think there is. So, you know, I guess we disagree on that too. Maybe we'll work this out, but I'd rather work it out here than work it out in a hearing where, you know, somebody's business is at risk. If we put a barrier, if we just put a door, you're not in this at all, that will clarify this, rather than leaving it ambiguous. Okay, maybe I am in this, maybe I'm not. Here's 20 grand, start your business, then you have your hearing, and then you decide later, well, you're not in this. I just think we should try to spell it out as much as we can, and totality is, when you say that, it just means that you get to make a decision that you want, rather than having objective standards in place.
Okay.
And I know
from
the
my
law works that
perspective,
way.